What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. This week we're going to be diving into artist tattoos, so hopefully there's a tip or two that you can take home with you and apply to your own work. You ready? Let's get into it. Alright, the first tattoo for today is this Evie Pokemon tattoo sent in from Selena Gunns. You mentioned in your email that you weren't a big fan of those harsh line cuts that you used for those color changes, and what I believe you're talking about are those lines that are around the white spot on the forehead and down on the paw. And I think you have the right idea, it just needs to be executed correctly. The shadow being casted from the ear onto the tail is a great example of that. What I would suggest is maybe using colored lines or even lightening up that wash that you use for those particular lines. That way, if you're using a gray wash and they fade away in the future, you're left with a nice, hard, crisp contrast. You could go the colored outline route like our buddy Perj here. You'll notice he uses a lot of colored outlines, allowing those colors to butt up nice and close to each other without any other distractions. It's almost like you don't feel the edge at all. I know it's hard to tell, which I guess is a good thing, but you can really notice it when you zoom into Mario's pants and his nose. When we go back to your tattoo, I can tell that you're using some kind of gray wash outline, which seems to segment these colors just a bit too much. We want that color transition to feel more seamless. We should only really be seeing two colors here, not color, outline, and then another color. If it were me, I would try to match that outline with the darkest color of that area. Now, another thing that I notice in this tattoo is the shading in her ear. That black shade really isn't smooth. That could be easily solved with just your hand movement. So obviously, with that black shading, we want to start in the more shadowy areas and work our way out, which you did, but it doesn't seem like you're ending your stroke at the same spot in the ear, leaving it a little choppy. Another spot in this tattoo that I'd like to discuss is the pointy tail. I know a lot of artists generally have trouble when it comes to nice fine points. You want to make sure that you're whipping from the bottom, working your way up, ending each tip of that line with a taper, which can be pretty difficult. It is a technique that does take some mastering. If you end up doubling back, you're going to end up with a rather blunt tip, and it's not going to be as sharp as it should be. When it comes to the outline in her fluffy chest area, I think you could have made that with a light gray line and then shaded the area to the right a light gray to match. That way you wouldn't have this super noticeable line there doing absolutely nothing. And it looks like it's barely in there to begin with. So again, I think you're on the right track as far as those color separation lines go. You might just want to try dialing them back a bit. Also, maybe trying to get those points nice and crisp with that taper technique. But I appreciate you so much, Selena, for sending that in and letting me talk about it. Alright, the next tattoo sent over is from Shahn. And Shahn, you sent over this little red devil tattoo that we're going to talk about. So there's definitely some good and definitely some bad in this tattoo, Shahn. Let's talk about the good. The red saturation in this tattoo is on point. The outlines in this tattoo are pretty good. Well, some spots could use some love. To me, it looks like you may have started this tattoo around the foot area and worked your way up. Those outlines around the foot are pretty good, but as we work our way up towards his head and even the pitchfork, those lines kind of get lost. The outline around his head seems kind of weak, and the outline at the top of the pitchfork has the same issue that we discussed on the last tattoo. Again, nice clean points are tough to pull off, but as far as the outline around his head, there is no excuse not to have a second pass just to clean that up a bit. Of course, my eyeballs cannot help but see those outlines that are not connecting, close to the horn and on his little underwear. This is something that's easily fixable, just go back and connect those lines. When I look through my tattoos when they're finished, if I see something like this, there's no way I'm letting it out of the door. Simple fix. Clean it up. Another thing is his left ear. I'm not sure if that's how the design was before tattooing it, but it does look like his ear is coming over onto his face. That's not something that can necessarily be fixed now since it's already in there, but keep that in mind for future tattoos. You want to make sure that your design is solid, whether or not it's yours, before making the tattoo, because things like this could have been prevented. The bottom area of the pitchfork gets a bit messy. Those outlines at the very bottom kind of got away from you, they look a bit squiggly, and the black shading in the handle isn't doing you any benefit. I think you could have gotten away with a minimal shading of black in that handle. However, it is very tricky to shade black with yellow. Adding gray to yellow turns the yellow a green hue, so if you're not super clean with that black shade, you're gonna end up with a green handle. Another thing that you could add to this tattoo to really enhance it would be line weights. You know I love them. I think a nice thicker outline would have helped tremendously around the entire body of this devil. It would have just gave it some extra flavor, and it would make this red pop even more than it already does. The yellow in the diaper is also a bit distracting, just my personal preference, but my eye keeps getting distracted to that area in particular. It probably would have made this tattoo a lot cleaner had you no yellow outlines in that underwear altogether. So Shahn, to recap, I do think your saturation is on point. I do think you could focus more on building better, stronger outlines and making sure that your design is 100% before putting it on skin. But thank you so much for sending that in. Alright, the next tattoo sent in is from Robledo. And Robledo, you sent in these two little angel tattoos that are done primarily in red ink with just a little bit of black. At first glance, I think this tattoo is exceptional. You clearly know anatomy, light and shadow, and how to finesse those finer details. You've got just the right amount of detail on the angel's face to the right. I think that extends to the muscle structure as well. The shadows that you have in the knees are excellent, and even their little belly buttons look super realistic. There doesn't seem to be any heavy distractions. The only part I really worry about is that back wing. However, since it is in the background, if it does happen to fade up a little bit, I think that'll be alright. Even the shadow under their arms, I think are done so well. It's dark where it needs to be and kind of slowly fans out where that arm pulls itself away from the body. I noticed you use a liner to add a nice, messy, realistic feel to that hair, and I think that's an area that could have really gotten away from you pretty easily. You've got some nice use of skin tone on the angel on the right's arm, how there's barely any red shades there. It just really helps out with the contrast when it comes to lights and shadows. The only part I really worry about with this tattoo is how it's going to heal 6 months to a year from now. If you look around the outside of the tattoo, you'll notice that the client's skin is a little red. So I'm curious as to what parts on the inside of the tattoo are that same shade and not tattooed in actual ink. When using red in a tattoo like this, sometimes it's rather difficult to tell what's actually tattooed and what's just irritated. But even if some of that red does fade out over time, that's something that you could easily go back into and add some more details. If you get a chance, send me a photo in about 6 months or so. I'd love to see it. But excellent work, Robledo. Thank you so much for sending that in. All right, the next one is from Blake Jones. And Blake, you sent in this tattoo of Captain Spaulding. All right, for the most part, I think this tattoo is pretty good. The first thing that I notice and bothers me quite a bit is the background. If you were to pull up 10 images of Captain Spaulding tattoos, they'd all have the same background. To me, this just kind of shows a sign of laziness. It just blocks it off too weird and it's a big black mess. You can build some sort of shade around it or work on building it into that existing tattoo on the right. Or, since the left side of his face is already pretty dark, you probably wouldn't even need to add that background. And you probably could have got away with adding just a light outline on the right side of his face, or just a little shade. That way there's just not this big messy black around the entire tattoo. It blends in the brim of the hat into the background and also pushes that black around his eyes into the foreground. If you were to have a lighter tone in the back or no background at all, it would have really sunk in those black eyes. So let's pretend that black background isn't there and let's focus on the details of the face. Now the eyes are very striking and I think you did an excellent job with those white highlights. However, everywhere else in the face seems to be lacking those details. It almost looks like you used just mag for everything else, when in fact I think outlines work great for things like wrinkles and facial hair. When working on a portrait, you want to make sure that you have nice focus on the eyes, nose, and mouth. Everything else can be a little out of focus, like you did with the ear. But the more details you put up front, the less you can worry about the background, because it's going to bring a nice focus to where you want your eyes to be. Also, the white in this tattoo really isn't doing you any benefit. It would have been nice to just see that white in the eyes and in the mouth. And it would have been nice to see those nasty-ass yellow teeth that Captain Spaulding is known for. So again, I think your biggest problem with this tattoo is just your lack of definition in some areas. As I've said before, this is definitely something that I struggled with in the past, making my portraits look too painterly. I had to bust out that liner to make sure that those portraits really popped. So Blake, I think you should just work on the finer details of the face and those backgrounds, and I think you'll be a lot happier in the long run. All right, the next one sent in is from Austin Nunn. And Austin, you sent in this up tattoo. Where to begin? Well, the good part about this tattoo is I can tell who they are. So there's that. I'm not sure exactly where to start with this tattoo, so we will start with the outlines. I understand you're trying to make those pieces of tape look transparent, but right now they just look rather weak, having no outlines. You could use a very light gray wash to outline those. That way they've got some sort of strength and they aren't falling in with your skin tone. You do have some sort of border, but this being a newer tattoo, I worry that they won't hold up over time. Adding some color, I really think would have helped, as well as this is an animation style tattoo, so I do think you can get away with it. Maybe some tans or some browns would have helped those things look not so unfinished. As for the outlines around the Polaroid itself, it does look like those outlines get a bit wiggly, especially toward the bottom, which I do think most of that will come with experience. You've only been tattooing a year, so I can't expect perfection. The shadows on the bottom pieces of tape really throw me off, as they're a bunch of dots and they're on the top side of the tape, not the bottom. It's just not making a whole lot of sense to me, because you have mag shading on the bottom of these pieces of tape and stipple shading on the top. So I'm just not really sure where the light source is coming from. Speaking of stipple shading, I think you really overdid it when it came to his shirt. I probably wouldn't have put any of that stipple shading in the shirt, just to make it look clean. Or if anything, just a little bit of mag shading just to keep that shirt looking white. As we said before, adding gray to yellow kind of turns that yellow into green, so her shirt just looks a little pukey. And I'm not sure if this is the angle of the photo, but it does look like his right side of the face is a lot fatter than his left. His glasses, his cheeks, even his eye seem to be a bit more stretched on that side. The white through most of this tattoo isn't really doing you any benefit. It really shouldn't be there. I do like the white outline around the two of them, as it gives a nice separation from the background. But most of the other whites, they don't really need to be there. If we're being honest, most of the shading in this tattoo kinda seems a little messy. Not a lot of it seems very controlled. A good example of that would be in her collar and around her ear. It doesn't really look like that shading is headed in any one direction. Rather, it's just there. Now, this could be 100% personal opinion, but I do think that this tattoo doesn't really need any of that stipple shading. It's just kind of making it look dirty overall, especially with this design. I think you would have been better off with mags in this particular piece. Some advice would be to really be careful when it comes to adding those lighter shades on top of those darker shades. For example, the yellow in her dress and the white on his face. When using tones like yellow, you want to make sure to stay away from gray wash shades. Use tones like brown or purple. It'll just give it a nicer, cleaner effect and won't look so green. Also, try not to let that white be your saving grace. When it comes to this background, you want to butt that blue all the way up to where you're going to add that white. It'll just make it cleaner. For other tattooers watching, you don't want to add that white first, otherwise you're going to muddy up that white with the blue. So often, to reiterate, I think you should only be using stipple shading when the design calls for it. I think you should focus on your relationship between these lighter shades and the gray wash. And you're essentially 2 years in, these outlines should be squeaky clean. Hopefully some of these tips help, and thank you so much for sending that in. Alright, that's going to wrap it up for the critiques this week, but I would love to shine a spotlight on the artist who I think did the best job this episode. And that artist is Robledo, with these 2 little red angel tattoos. As I said earlier, I think this thing is done exceptionally well, and it's a beauty to look at. Light and shadows are some of the most difficult things to capture when it comes to human anatomy, especially when it comes to red ink. This thing could have gone wrong in so many ways so quickly, but you were able to pull it off so well and capture all those little details without any major hiccups. So again, excellent job, Robledo, and congratulations on being this week's winner. Alright, don't forget, before we go, you know I like to feature an artist who I think you should all know and be following. And the featured artist this week is Roberto Euán out of Los Angeles. This guy's tattoos are insanely vibrant and hits the nail on the head over many topics that we discussed this week. His outlines and saturation are amazing, but not only that, he knows where to put the whites and knows how to control color separation. I see a lot of artists out there using these party dots, but most of the time they miss the mark. Roberto really knows how to work them and knows what colors work well together. His designs are extremely unique and fun, and well crafted before they're put on actual skin. So if you're looking to study or just some inspiration, Roberto's got it. So make sure to head on over to his page, give him a follow, and let him know I sent you. Once again, thank you guys so much for watching and sending in your work. Please don't forget to subscribe, and as always, I will see you all next week.